I'm happy to be here.
Tequila Tuesday even sounds even better than Tequila Thursday. So yeah, that sounds perfect.
I'm down with it.
So Steph, you're with Patrón, just in case anybody couldn't see that fairly obvious map in front of you.
Yes.
And guests. So
yeah,
could you please,
so
what we'd like to do is have everybody tell us their official like business card title.
sure. So my official business card title is East Coast Manager of Trade Education and Mixology with Patrón Spirits Company.
Outstanding.
So,
Outstanding.
yeah,
I don't know that you get the record for the longest title, but you're up there.
I'm trying to cut out the mixology part because I'm like, everyone knows I make cocktails. I don't think that needs to be on the business card. But basically what that means is that for all of the East Coast, I handle education primarily focused on trade, but also consumer or consumer via trade. Like if I'm hosting something like this, where there might be members of the hospitality industry or basically guests of the hospitality industry that just want to learn a little bit more about what they're drinking.
Excellent. So East Coast, where are you based out of?
Oh, well, I was moved to Miami to do my role. That's actually Bacardi headquarters. But obviously the last year there were some changes with everything. And I'm currently in Charlotte, North Carolina. My family all lives here. So I kind of advocated to move where I could have a little bit more space. I could set up, a bar like this to do a lot of virtual stuff and just kind of stretch my legs a little bit more than Miami. So I'm currently in Charlotte. We'll see if we make that permanent, but right now, North Carolina.
Okay, well, welcome.
Yeah.
We love here in North Carolina.
Maybe not
Yeah,
liquor
we're all
laws,
in North.
but
We're all in North Carolina.
Yeah.
So Bacardi, just a quick sidebar.
Yeah.
Patrón hasn't always been a Bacardi brand. It wasn't born a Bacardi brand, correct?
Correct. So
Yep.
Patrón is actually one of the longest standing large independent spirits companies until we got bought by Bacardi in 2018 in February. So for the entire duration of our existence until 2018, we were an independent company. So we weren't owned by any other parent companies. And for people that are in the know with spirits, almost everything that you drink that it has a major label on it is going to be under some umbrella company, that produces a bunch of different kinds of spirits. So Bacardi actually purchased us. We're happy to be a part of them. It's been a learning experience joining a company, starting off just being alone and being able to kind of just whatever, and then joining Bacardi and learning a lot about their brands and everything has been a fun experience. But from 1989 until 2018, we were completely an independent company. So kind of a crazy, cool story.
That's very of the moment, or certainly of the industry, where, as you put it, if you recognize that brand, it's probably under a larger umbrella. There's for distribution, for all of the reasons, and it seems like all the big guys want one of everything. Bacardi wants their tequila. They want to have something that scratches that itch. So one of the main reasons we were excited to have you on this is because Luke visited the Hacienda a little while back, and he was really taken with specifically the Roca series. Could you chat a little bit about what this specific series is before we start tasting it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to take maybe a couple minutes to talk about kind of how we created Patrón and therefore how we moved into Roca.
Please.
If you think that fits right now, I think that would give everyone sort of like a pretty good frame of the spirit that we're tasting and a little bit of background knowledge if you're not super, super familiar with tequila. And also wanted to say, feel free to put any questions in the chat so that they can be relayed to me. I'm happy to answer anything that I can. And if I can't answer it, I will find someone. I will nag our, director of production and find that answer. He loves when I text him late and try to figure out something from him. So, So like I was saying, Patrón was developed. We became a company in 1989, right? And when you think about the history of tequila, I won't go into too much depth as far as like the actual origin of tequila. I know that there's some people on this call that might be more familiar, or maybe some people that are just sort of dipping their toes into tequila. So I always like to touch on the fact that, tequila is a really important spirit in Mexico, obviously. Tequila actually was the very first appellation of origin that was created in Mexico. If everyone's familiar with, say, champagne or cognac, you know that has to be produced in a certain region, and has a certain sort of set of rules around it, right? Champagne has to be produced in Champagne in France. So the really cool thing about tequila is that it was the very first appellation of origin established in Mexico, which is a really great sense of pride for any country to have something that, a product that really warrants an appellation of origin. So it's really, really special. Tequila started to kind of be produced around the 1500s, right? So in Mexico, we see the indigenous people of Mexico using the agave plant for tons of different purposes. They're using it for building purposes, for ceremonial purposes, for weapons and things like that. And the agave, actually, the sap of the agave was being fermented and being made into this beverage called pulque, right? This is an alcoholic beverage called pulque. If you think about pulque, it's kind of, if you've had it before, you know what it's like. I'm not a huge fan of pulque, but a lot of
I don't know
people
anyone
are.
that is.
There's like, every time we'd bring a group down to Mexico, there's like 25 bartenders, and like one of them was like, oh my God, the pulque is so good. And then like 24 of them, they were like, this tastes like feet. So, there's a wide spectrum of pulque fans. I'm not one of them, but I respect the history of the beverage, of course. So the indigenous people of Mexico are drinking this pulque, right? And the Spanish come over with the European style distillation. They're drinking brandy, they bring over alembic stills and introduce this European style distillation to Mexico. So they take this plant that's already being fermented and being drank and used as an intoxicating beverage, and it starts being distilled in different regions of Mexico. And there's one that becomes really, really popular, and that is the vino de mezcal, or the wine from the agave that's being made in the town of Tequila. So long term, the vino de mezcal de tequila. Eventually, this starts to really gain in popularity. It's being cooked in these above ground steam ovens. It's being distilled in this European style with these copper pot stills. And this becomes known as just simply tequila. They drop the vino de mezcal de and just start calling it tequila. So now we have the difference. There is mezcal, that a lot of it is being produced in a very traditional way, cooking in underground pits, potentially using clay stills. But then we have also this beverage called tequila, which is usually being cooked in steam ovens, or being cooked in steam ovens, and then also distilled in more modern and European style stills, right? So tequila really starts growing in popularity in around World War I, World War II in the United States, when we're not able to actually import a lot of goods from Europe, obviously because of the war. So we're not getting brandy, we're not getting other stuff from Europe, but we can get things from Mexico, right? So tequila starts to really grow in popularity around the 30s, 40s, 50s. And at the time, everything that was being produced was 100% agave, because that's just, it wouldn't make sense to make it any other way, right? You're making 100% agave. That's what it originated with, and that's what you're making it. But the demand was so high that tequila producers at the time were not really able to keep up. This new demand for tequila in the United States was brand new. And agaves take, if you're aware, they take 7 to 9 years to mature before you're able to really harvest the sugars appropriately. So even though there's a demand for it, you can't just all of a sudden start making more tequila, right? So the demand is growing, and then people start making tequila with not 100% agave sugars. So they start producing tequila and adding in beet sugar or cane sugar, and mixing those sugars into the agave sugars to create this tequila product. The standards start really declining in the 60s and 70s for tequila, to the point where tequila can be made with up to 49% of sugars not coming from the agave, right? And for a lot of people, especially a slightly older generation of people, I was actually just talking to my doctor like a week ago about tequila, because everyone always asks, like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, Patrón. And they always tell me this horror story about the first time that they had tequila, right? a lot of people, and even, you know, younger generation, I'm not even in the younger generation anymore, but like a lot of younger people have also had a horror story where they've taken a bunch of shots of tequila, they feel like crap afterwards, and they never went back to it because they were like, that stuff is terrible. And in the 70s and 80s, this is what everyone's consuming. So like a lot of people that were drinking during that time have a really terrible story about tequila, right? So this mixo tequila, as we call it, is really popular in the 70s and 80s. We like to call it the Dark Age of Tequila because it's really just not the best example of, you know, this really beautiful spirit. And with this massive, you know, demand for tequila from Mexico, but also really limited amount of 100% agave tequilas that were being produced, our creators, Jean-Paul DeJoria and Martin Crowley, really sort of decided that there was a need in the market for 100% agave ultra premium tequila, right? So that's why in 1989, Patron is born. And all of a sudden, there is an ultra premium tequila on the market. We weren't the first to be ultra premium in the United States, but we kind of paved the way for a lot of ultra premium brands that are being produced and consumed in the United States now. So that's the long story of why Patron was created. We are 100% agave. We always have been, and we always will be. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about, what do you guys think of that? Any questions? Do you want me to go on about the difference between our Roca and then our core product here?
That would be great, actually, because you led us up kind of historically to where the core product starts.
Yeah.
Why, like, what is this, and why is it kind of going backwards?
Yeah, it is actually going backwards. I'm glad you put it that way. Also, if one of my AirPods falls out, just let me know, because these things tend to be a little wily while I'm on calls. So
Will do.
One fell out one time and I was like, what's going on? So the reason why this is going backwards is because our silver tequila, this was our first tequila that we ever created. And kind of everything that we have stems from this. It doesn't stem from this production specifically, but everything is sort of built off of this, right? So the thing that makes us a little bit different is that our core silver and all of their, we call it the core line. It's like our base line that you've, you know, seen a lot of. I'm sure everyone has seen this bottle before. Is that we use two different styles of crushing the agave or extraction of the agave sugars to produce it, right? So let's take a step back and say, how do we cook the agave? We're cooking it in these above ground steam ovens, right? We only use clay brick ovens. There are other ways to cook agave or extract those sugars. We only use steam ovens. And then after we cook these in the agaves in the steam ovens, you need to basically take that agave and extract the sugar from it, right? And if you think of the agave, it's very similar in my mind to, say, like a sweet potato or an artichoke, in the way that the sweet potato, before you cook it, it's really starchy. You wouldn't want to take a bite of it, right? It's not very good. And you can tell that there's sugar in there because there's a lot of starch, a lot of carbohydrates, but it hasn't been converted to taste really sweet yet or be edible. So when you cook these agaves in these clay ovens, it converts those sugars to sugars that you can actually ferment and distill, right? So we need to take that cooked agave, we need to take the sugars, that cooked flesh, off of the fibers, which is how I compare it to an artichoke. If you've eaten an artichoke before, right off of the actual plant, you know, there's that meaty part that's been cooked, but then there's also kind of that like spiny fibrous part that you don't eat. We need to extract that meaty part of the agave off of that fibrous part that we can't really ferment and distill. So there's two different ways to do that. Well, there's a couple different ways, but the two ways that we use are the roller mill method and then also the Tohono method. The roller mill method is a more modern process that was actually developed in the sugar industry to extract the sugars from sugarcane. So if you think about it, it's basically two rollers and they roll together like this. If you think of like a steam roller or steam, whatever it's called, they roll together like this. And they have these little grooves on the side, and they basically, the agave goes through and they extract the sugars. We also use high pressure water to basically separate the fibers from that sugary, meaty juice. And that's how we get the liquid or the mosto that we're going to use to ferment. Now, with this, we also use the Tohono method. So the Tohono is the oldest, most ancestral way of separating those sugars from the fibers of the agave. And the Tohono method, it consists of a big stone pit with a giant 2-ton volcanic rock called a Tohono stone. And that Tohono basically moves around in a circle in that pit. Back in the day, there was donkeys that were used or horses. Now it's mostly mechanical or tractors, although I think there are some like super niche small brands that might still be using animal power, but for the most part, it's sort of a mechanical thing nowadays. But this Tohono slowly moves around this pit and extracts those sugars from the fibers. Now, the cool thing about the Tohono is that, well, first of all, it's really inefficient, right? A lot of older methods of doing something is going to be more inefficient. And we think about it nowadays, even the older methods or ways to like make bread or crush spices or any of that. It's about manpower or person power, I should say. And that method of extraction, there's a little bit more finesse in it, right? So the Tohono is inefficient. It's also an organic substance. It's volcanic stone. So over time, it is going to wear out. You're going to have to replace it. It's not the easiest thing to replace, this 2-ton volcanic stone. But it adds this super rich and historical element to the tequila, and also a really like a really in-depth flavor profile to the tequila as well. And a lot, when you're crushing the agave, basically, I always compare it to, say, making wine. When you're making wine and you're crushing those grape skins against the juice, the longer you leave those skins on, the more tannins and the more color you're going to extract from the grapes. It's the same with tequila. The more you leave it sitting on that fiber, the more that you're grinding that fiber basically into that meaty cooked flesh of the agave, the more flavor, the more texture you're going to extract from that. So Core Patrón is a blend of those two styles. So we're using the roller mill method, we're using the Tohono method to extract the sugars from that cooked agave. Afterwards, it's going to go to fermentation. And there's 2 different ways that we ferment as well. Stop me if I'm going too in depth, but
no, this is great.
Why not?
It's exactly what we invited you for.
All right, perfect. So after the extraction, it goes into fermentation. Now we use pine wood fermentation tanks. You can also use stainless steel. Stainless steel is a more efficient method, more modern. It's easier to clean. It doesn't need to be replaced as often, but we use the pine wood fermentation tanks. Again, we really like to preserve these traditional methods like the Tohono. And the pine wood fermentation is an organic substance. So our master distiller, Francisco Alcaraz, when developing our recipe, decided that using these pine wood fermentation tanks, the organic matter of that wood, with the way that it will swell and contract and also like interact with the yeast, is going to add to even more depth of flavor for our flavor profile. So they have to be replaced all the time, kind of a pain, but that was the way that our brand was created. And so we only use pine wood fermentation tanks. So fermentation, then we move on to distillation. Now, I might mention that the way that we produce this, the roller versus Tohono, we keep the processes separate the whole way until the juice is finished and we blend it back together. So that means the Tohono is over here, the roller mill is over here. It goes on to fermentation. The Tohono we ferment with the fibers. The roller mill we ferment without the fibers. Then it moves on to distillation. We use copper pot stills for our distillation method. If you remember when I mentioned how the Spanish brought over these copper stills for distillation, again, a very traditional way of making tequila. We believe, for everyone here that enjoys other spirits outside of tequila, I don't know why you would, but if you do, you'll notice with things like, small batch scotch and bourbon, a lot of them use copper pot stills because of the fact that they really retain so much flavor and create a real, intriguing depth of flavor with the spirit. So distillation, Tohono has the fibers, the roller mill does not. And once we distill twice and we get that final product, then we blend it back together to produce our silver tequila. Now, after the silver really gained in popularity and we have our Reposado and Añejo of that line, we decided that we're making this really beautiful like roller mill and also this really beautiful Tohono spirit juice, that why not release a product that is 100% Tohono only. And I have to say that I was really happy that y'all wanted to do the Roca, because I don't get to do it as often because a lot of people are more familiar with the core line. So I teach that quite a bit, but the Roca is my favorite that we have. Because if you're in the trade or you're a bartender, I don't know what it is about us. I bartended for like, I mean, in the hospitality industry for like 17 years before starting with brand work. And it's like we always want something that's like more bold, more intriguing, more depth, more power, more, whatever. And this really offers that. So this is a really beautiful expression of tequila, in my opinion. If you want something that's even more of a plus up, higher proof, more depth of flavor, and more hit you in the face, more for an aficionado, that's what the Roca offers. So it is 100% Tohono only maceration. And then it is slightly higher proof than our silver. Our distiller, Francisco Alcaraz, felt that the higher proof for this line really fit with that Tohono method. And in the fact that the Tohono flavors are going to be a little bit more punchy, a little bit more outside of the normal spectrum of just say like citrus, floral, a little bit herbaceous, roasted agave notes, honey. This then expands that even more and says, okay, but now it's like mushroomy. Now it has a little salinity. Now it has some brine to it. And that higher ABV really sort of helps balance all of those massive flavors. So that is basically the difference between the two. And Tohono was really the method that was used for a very, very long time with all of tequila production. Until, like I said, tequila was growing so much in popularity that using a Tohono stone to produce tequila was just so inefficient. There goes my earpod. It was so inefficient that they really couldn't continue to do it to keep up with production in Mexico. So that was when the roller mill was introduced to kind of speed up production. Nothing wrong with the roller mill method. It's just a different way. It produces a different kind of style of tequila, and it's a little bit more of a modern, efficient method.
Outstanding. Thank you for breaking that down for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as much as I like hearing about it, we should taste it.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's a question in the chat. Does Roca mean rock?
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay,
Roca's rock. Piedra is stone. So yes, that is basically giving a homage to the stone or the rock that is in the Tohono that is creating this tequila.
Nice, nice. So you don't think it'd be easy to just pop on down to the hardware store and get yourself another stone?
No, not really. And it's really crazy because like for the longest time, people were drinking a lot of roller mill tequila, and there's really good roller mill tequila on the market. I love roller mill. I actually begged to take home some roller mill only tequila of ours. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but I did. And because it's fabulous. It's really light and floral and like delicate and just like playful. And that's really fun sometimes, it's just a totally different flavor profile. It's fun to sort of taste the spectrum, if you will, as far as like the styles. And I think that there's some really beautiful roller mill tequila out there as well.
One thing you brought up earlier that was interesting was experimenting, and Luke pointed this out earlier, with the different ABVs on these. What was the thought process? Because your normal line is 40%, right? Right across the board?
Correct.
And these are all different.
Yes. So
what was that idea?
Yeah, so I might mention too that all of our products were developed by our master distiller Francisco Alcaraz, who actually recently passed away a few months ago, unfortunately, but he left a really astounding legacy as far as the history of tequila is concerned. He actually was probably the most, if not one of the most tenured distillers in Mexico. He was distilling for, I think, around 53 years or something like that. And he was with us since the very beginning and developed the Patrón house style, and basically all the products that you see in front of you or all the products in our portfolio he developed. So Francisco was originally an engineer, but he quickly moved into the business of tequila at a very young age. And he is such an amazing expert as far as tequila is concerned. So, 40% is really pretty standard for a lot of the tequilas that you'll see in the United States. However, with the Roca, really just the fact that the Tohono offers so much more flavor, and also he wanted to really offer a product line that really catered a little bit more to the tequila aficionado versus just a casual tequila drinker. This product was really designed so that you could make it in a cocktail, you could take a shot of it, you could sip it if you wanted to, but pretty much anyone that's out there in the world could have this and say, that's a really great tequila. That's not too sharp. That's not too, it doesn't burn. It's, you know what I mean? It's very palatable, right? But sometimes really palatable, you want to plus up from that because you're like, well, this is great, but I just really want to explore even more flavor with something, right? So that's why Roca was created as a little bit more of an aficionado's tequila, a little bit more of a bartender's tequila, and also a little bit more of a tequila when we go into the age marks that really was meant to encourage people that are pretty hardcore whiskey drinkers to try an aged tequila versus just drinking whiskey, because these are actually aged in used whiskey barrels. So they really do have a lot of the flavor profile from that would be similar to like an American bourbon because of the use of American oak and the whiskey being in those barrels before as well. So definitely more of a, when you put it in a drink, you really, really taste it. If you're sipping on it, it's gonna kind of explode. The flavors are gonna just kind of not overwhelm, that's the wrong word, but they're really intense. They're wonderful. And so the ABV really kind of had to match with that depth and intensity of flavor.
That's great. I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago, they actually dropped the word mixto, and now they're just labeling tequilas as either 100% agave, 100% de agave, or just tequila. Is that correct?
Yeah, so mixto really is a slang that was kind of created. I don't even actually know if that was ever technically an approved term according to these CRT, but the CRT actually, as far as I remember, has referred to it as just tequila and then 100% de agave tequila. So it's a little bit confusing, or if you're not paying attention, it could be confusing. Although so much of the tequila that's in the United States now is 100% agave. It's generally a consensus that unless you're paying like $7 a bottle for tequila, that it's usually 100% agave. But mixto is just sort of, a slang term that we use to describe a tequila that is being produced with not 100% agave sugars. So like I said before, the cane sugar or beet sugar or something like that, that's being added during fermentation to basically supplement the agave, because the agave takes so much longer to mature and harvest versus like cane sugar.
Right. Thank you.
There was a really big brand on the market during those dark years you're mentioning, and it's probably still a really big brand. I think Joe is his name. And I noticed the word mixto on the label. Not only of that, but he had a more like familiar or something. There was like a traditional. They had a fancier label, also labeled mixto, which kind of baffled me. Is the idea, or if you're looking, I know that's not your product, but when you're looking at that, at least it's honest. They're saying what it is. But are you think that brand particularly isn't worried that people know the difference?
I think that every brand has a strategy as far as how they want to sell their product, right? And I think that whatever brand you might be speaking of probably came to terms with what the utilization of their tequila is. And therefore, it being a mixto wasn't necessarily a negative thing for them, if that makes sense. And like, honestly, when you're in Mexico, 100% agave is great, but sometimes you can't afford 100% agave, or even the United States, sometimes you can't afford it. It's going to be more expensive, right? So there's definitely a place for these not 100% agave tequilas or the mixtos that are out there. And, there's a lot of application for something like that in, say, a frozen margarita at a whatever dive bar or something, like that's a fine product to throw in there sometimes. And so I think there's always a time and place for every product. Whether I enjoy it or not, doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. But I will say that generally speaking, if it's not 100% agave, it's not really necessarily looked upon as being as high of a quality of product, right? It's mixed with something. It's kind of like margarine versus butter or so, like, yeah, it works. It works. You can spread, you can use it to spread, you can use it to make toast, but is it going to give you that same feeling that butter does when you eat it? Not so much.
Oh, I love your answer. It started out so diplomatic.
But yeah, so if you want, we can go ahead and pour a little bit of Roca. We've been talking for 30 minutes now, and nobody, well, at least I haven't had any tequila yet, so I feel like it might be a good time for that.
Oh, you should do that. We didn't wait for you.
So one thing I would want to mention to anyone that's tasting at home, I know maybe not everyone has this, but maybe we'll have the opportunity to taste it in the future. We'll go through a little bit of like tasting spirit, especially one that is at 45%, I think. Yeah, 45% for the Roca, which is pretty high, right? And this is my first drink of anything aside from water that I'm having today. So shooting, or not shooting, but like putting this product in your mouth immediately is going to kind of shock your system a little bit. So we want to make sure to prepare before we are tasting this. So for everyone at home, I know some people have tasted spirits before, maybe some have not, but this is kind of how the catadores, or the professional tequila tasters in Mexico, when they're performing a la cata, which is basically going through and categorically tasting tequila. This is kind of how they prepare their mouth a little bit for what they're tasting. Now, sometimes also there is another tequila in advance of the tequila that you originally want to taste to sort of prepare your mouth, but we're not going to go crazy with it. So yeah, so if you are tasting tequila, I love tasting, and this is a tequila tasting flute, but any glass with a bulb at the bottom, basically shape, is fine for tasting tequila as well. You can use wine glass, you could probably use a champagne flute. This is kind of similar to a sherry glass, although it's a little bit larger, but really anything with a bulb is what you want to use to be tasting tequila. So everyone's used to kind of the swirl thing, right? So I've already been swirling this, and I saw that you guys were too, which is, I should have said something at first, but really once you are doing, if you're doing a professional tasting, you want your tequila to sort of sit in the glass for a little bit, preferably with a cover on top, to really sort of settle. And when you take that cover off, or after your tequila has been sitting for a while, you want to give it a nose. And when you're giving it a nose, I like to keep my mouth open a little bit as well, and sort of be breathing out of my nose and my mouth at the same time. And you might want to also switch nostrils, because sometimes, and don't ask me to explain it, sometimes you're going to get a different aroma depending on which nostril you are smelling, right? Be aware, again, this is 45% alcohol, so you are going to kind of get a pretty big whiff of it at first. So don't stick your nose all the way inside of the glass like you would with wine. So we give it a nose. And then if your tequila was sitting nice and flat, then you're going to give it a little bit of a swirl to mix that up a little bit and kind of release all the aromas. And then you're going to give it a nose again and kind of tell the difference, between when it's been sitting and also when you start to aerate a little bit. So I will ask you guys, what are you sensing on the nose? What do you get on the nose of the Roca Silver?
I just drank some because I've been I couldn't stop. I get a lot of grassiness from it.
Mm-hmm.
Claire gets citrus.
Definitely.
I'm getting mostly vanilla and almost like a menthol.
Okay, menthol is a great call out as well. Vanilla is great. And vanilla, a lot of times, that's a great segue into talking about additives, because vanilla is a natural flavor that occurs from the conversion of the sugars with the agave, the cooking. So vanilla is a great call out, especially when you go onto the reposado and the añejo, because of the barrels, they're going to add a vanilla flavor to it. But it's important to recognize when you are smelling vanilla on something, whether you're smelling, say, like a natural like vanilla bean, or whether you're smelling kind of vanilla flavoring, right? Does it smell like vanilla icing, vanilla cake, or does it smell like a fresh vanilla bean, right? Because there are There are no, well, you're able to add additives to tequila up to 1% of the bottle in Mexico. We don't add any additives to ours, but it is 100% legal for people to do that. So it's really important that we educate ourselves and make sure to recognize flavors that may not naturally occur in tequila. And one of those is that sort of confectionery sort of vanilla flavor, which might hint to the fact that maybe someone has added something in there to give that flavor to the tequila.
I don't want to reference that same brand again, but
long as
it
we
tastes
don't call
like
it out,
California
yeah.
Chardonnay.
Yeah. There's a lot of, so people can add, there's 4 different really styles of additives you can add to your tequila. There's glycerin, sugar, there's color, like caramel coloring, and then there's oak extract. So your tequila can be altered in one of many different ways or all of those ways. And there's a lot of producers that are utilizing those, and I won't name any names, but you'll notice that there's a lot of additives being produced. I really need to get a different set of earbuds here, but there's different, my ears are too small or something. But you'll notice that a lot of times the production method sort of, I don't want to say encourages, but like you'll notice that with certain production methods, there's more use of additives, right? When you cut corners and you're not really, you know, taking the time to really extract those natural flavors from the agave, then you might notice that people are using more additives to supplement those flavors, right? So anyway, let's go on to specifically the tasting. I know we're all tasting here, but just so everyone in the audience, if they haven't tasted tequila before, they know. There's a couple different steps to warm your mouth up, which I think is kind of great, even though we've all sort of been enjoying this a little bit, just so you know for the future. So that first step is to sort of put a tiny bit of tequila on your lips and lick your lips and rub it on your lips to get your lips prepared. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to look really silly. If anyone's tasting at home, please, you can do it as well and look silly with me. You can also take your tongue, rub it up on your gums, rub it on your bottom gums as well. Then next, you're going to take another little sip. And when you take this sip, you're going to let it rest kind of on the top center of your tongue and let it sort of cascade over the side of your tongue, right? So essentially this is preparing your tongue to taste the tequila and coating the edges of your mouth or the edges of your tongue and the tip of your tongue as well. So you take a tiny little bead, put it on the center of your mouth, and just slowly kind of let it drip to the side, right? There's another step that's really just kind of letting it sort of go down your throat a little bit as well. And once you've done that, the shock and surprise of tasting something should kind of go away when we actually taste. So let's do an official commentary on what we think the tasting notes are on this. So I'm going to take one more sip here, and I'd love to know what your tasting notes are and if you feel like they're mirrored from what you sensed on the nose earlier.
I think we've all, the 3 of us here, have really done a very good job preparing to taste. So we're going to pour a little more tequila in this glass.
Yeah, no problem. It's Tuesday, right? Why not?
Yeah.
So now that I have it on my palate, I'm going to taste, or I'm going to sense a little, first of all, the length of the flavor really just sort of, calling me. The depth of flavor, the finish on here is long, it's elegant, it's not going to be bitter or acrid, it's not syrupy sweet, it's not acidic. It really leaves this like long, lingering kind of velvety flavor in your mouth. It's important to note too, when we talk about sugar or sweetness, when we're tasting something, that when you ferment sugars, specifically here, like you're cooking the agave, that by cooking something, like if you cook a sweet potato, again, I'll use that reference, you can smell the sugars kind of caramelizing. And when you smell it, you think, wow, sweet, right? But if you've ever tasted a baked sweet potato without any sugar or marshmallows or something else on it, it's not that sweet, right? It has a little bit of residual sugar, but not that much. So when you taste something, it's important to recognize with tequila, especially, that you can get the essentially the vibe that there is something sweet there, the notation there's something sweet there, without actually having any actual sugar. And I think that's important to note with this as well, because I am getting sweet, like caramelized flavors, but I'm not getting any sugar in my mouth. It doesn't taste like I've drank something sweet, right? And that's an important note because of the fact that you can add sugar. The American palate loves sugar. They want sugar in everything. And a lot of companies, if they can get away with putting sugar in something, they do, because Americans think, wow, it's really sweet. It's really like easy to drink, really smooth. And that is a key sort of, flag that there's been some additives added to the tequila. But anyway, what do you all taste in this?
Well, one thing I noticed about
Sure.
the line, and maybe this is a lack of glycerin added, is how light it is on the tongue. Like it's in there. It's got a lot of flavor. Like you said, it lasts long. There's a lot really nice depth of flavor, salinity, like top. He was saying grassy notes, but herbaceousness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also getting like just like a little bit of like woodiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woody and mushroom and sort of that earthy umami flavor is something that occurs quite a bit in the Tohono method of tequila, right? We're going to get, because of those fibers, you're going to get a lot more that earthy soil, a little bit of that mushroomy kind of, like funk to it, for sure. That's absolutely something I get in Tohono tequila.
It seems like when you're using words in tastings like woody, which is kind of spot on, but you'd have to be careful that people didn't assume you were talking about oak.
Yeah,
I'm not getting that.
Yeah, it's different. And when you think about it, oak, a lot of times, especially if you are, like, for instance, this is not put in oak at all. So you shouldn't be getting those flavors from oak necessarily. And when you put something in a barrel, that doesn't necessarily mean it tastes like barrel, right? So the barrel imparts these other flavors to the spirit that you're tasting. American oak, a lot of times people say it is coconut and dill and baking spice and vanilla, things like that, right? But you're not gonna, unless it's a really young spirit, like been in there for a month or something, you're usually not gonna say, wow, it tastes like wood, just because of the barrel, right? But a lot of times you can get that. Yeah.
Steph, can I get you to repeat that last 3 lines? We kind of lost your audio.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. And if this goes out, I don't know, for some reason I can take my earbuds out. It just sounds better with these anyway. But so when you are putting a spirit in a barrel, a lot of times it's not going to taste like quote unquote wood, because the barrel is going to impart other flavors to it if it's aged properly. And a lot of times with, say, American oak, the flavors that you're going to get are going to be some dill, some coconut, baking spice, vanilla, things like that are coming from the barrel. You're not going to necessarily say, well, it tastes like wood, unless the spirit's been aged for a pretty brief period of time, or the blender really wants that kind of like sawdusty sort of wood. This doesn't taste like sawdust to me. This is more like forest floor, a little bit more of like wet, kind of musky wood, which is very different than the flavor that you would get from, say, a barrel.
So,
cool.
Yeah, that's great. I love geeking out on tasting.
Yeah.
I can say my interest in alcohol is academic. A couple of things. I think we want to make a cocktail.
Yeah.
But maybe while we're doing that, we can get you to talk about, you mentioned having the hospitality experience before kind of jumping to the brand side. Since this is the Industry Insider series, I'd love to ask you about that. How did you jump? How'd you make that jump?
Yeah, so as I talk, I guess I'll just let everyone know if they're making a cocktail with us, to get a rocks glass in front of you. If you do like salt on the rim of your glass, now's the time to do it. If you are wanting to rim it like a professional, I love just doing an outside rim, so you're not rubbing on the inside of the glass as well. There's no real need to get salt on the inside of the glass. Most of the time, the liquid just hits it and it falls down to the bottom of the glass and just makes a really salty cocktail. So a little bit of lime on the very outside, give your glass a light sit in the salt there. And I like to do a half rim on my glass, just so that way, if I feel like having salt, I can get a little bit. If I feel like a sip without salt, I can do that too. Also, if you're working in a restaurant or bar, I think that's a great option to give someone if they ask for salt, because they might, sometimes I get a lot of salt on the drink and I'm like, this is a little bit much. So so get your glass ready, your lime juice, your agave, and your Roca. What did I use for this? Roca Reposado, yes, for the margarita. So Yeah, so basically, I worked in bars since I was, well, bars and restaurants since I was like 16. I started off as a hostess, then I promptly moved to a server. And then at the young age of like 17, I was helping out as a bar back behind the bar, which where I lived wasn't necessarily legal, but the establishment that I worked at wasn't necessarily following the rules. This was, I'm 37 now, so this was 20 years ago. And in the hospitality world 20 years ago, it's kind of the Wild West. We've made a lot of improvements in hospitality now that I think are really amazing, especially like really talking about healthcare and talking about like standards of work and sexism in the workplace and things like that, which really weren't talked about 20 years ago as much, And I worked in an establishment where kind of all of that stuff sort of happened. And I was 17. They were like, "You're really good at your job. Let's throw you behind the bar. Let's see what you can do." And that's where I started. So, for also anyone that's listening or works in hospitality, I'm doing a really wonderful like fundamentals program for people that have never worked in hospitality before. And the message that we sort of like to convey to everyone is that no matter where you're at in your bartending or hospitality career, doing something like what I do is very attainable as long as you work hard and you continue to take opportunities to educate yourself like this, because there's so many educational opportunities available in the hospitality industry now that maybe weren't necessarily before. And the more you educate yourself, the more you are preparing yourself for, a different sort of role in hospitality. So very, very attainable. I worked kind of all over the place. I love tequila. I've always loved tequila. I actually lived in Mexico for about a year and a half. And I used to go to Mexico as a child with my parents, and I've just sort of always fell in love with it. I took like 5 years of Spanish in school. So Mexico has always just really been, had a special place in my heart. So I worked in a lot of establishments that were tequila or agave focused. And then I worked and ran a place in Phoenix that was not, and I still got voted best tequila selection in Phoenix. It was a whiskey and American whiskey kind of bar. And I still got voted best
It's
tequila.
Phoenix. Come on.
Yeah, I know. It's right next to the border. And so that's how I kind of got introduced to a little bit more of the brand side of things. And actually, I got this position because of someone that I knew who was a friend of mine that I knew from an event, my boss, David Allen. And he actually, told me about this opening and thought it would be perfect for me and kind of helped guide me along in the process. So having someone that sort of has your back and looks out for you if this is something that you really are interested in is always a great asset as well. So I know you posted, I can see you posted the ingredients in the chat. The liquor rolls in Arizona are very friendly. That's very true. So we're gonna make a Tommy's margarita. Tommy's is made famous by Tommy's in San Francisco. Julio Bermejo has perfected this recipe, and I chose this specific variation of the margarita because it's really easy to make at home, but it's absolutely excellent. I think sometimes people think you need to add orange juice or orange liqueur or something like that to your margarita. It's great. I love our citronge line, but I think this is also just a perfectly delicious and well-balanced margarita. So so 1 ounce of lime juice here. Always use fresh lime juice if you can help it. The difference in the cocktail between fresh lime juice and a sweet and sour, or like Rose's lime juice, which I just don't think Rose's lime juice is lime juice. I don't know what that stuff is. It's just so not good.
No limes were harmed in the making of Rose's lime.
No. Green food coloring and sugar and lime flavoring.
Yeah.
So a half an ounce of agave nectar. And the fun thing too with using a sweetener in your drink is that you can also play around with different kinds of sweeteners to give a different flavor profile to the drink. Agave nectar is in here because we think it balances with the agave notes in the tequila really well, but you're welcome to experiment with just using simple syrup or using a simple syrup made with brown sugar or unrefined sugar in the raw, honey, anything like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and shake. I don't know if you guys want to mute me or keep talking or something, but I see y'all already made your drinks. You guys are so fast. I'm like,
well, you were talking, so Luke.
No, I was just going to say, you were talking, we were listening and making drinks. And I do think it's an important thing for everybody that's watching. When you talk about these sweeteners or acidity, it's all up to you. You're making it at home. You can adjust any of these things. So just because, like, if you try it with this recipe, if it's too sour, add some more sweetener or tequila.
Cheers.
But we're gonna cheers.
Let's try this. Oh, she's still shaking. Maybe
I'm
I'll
done now.
give her a up. Done. Oh, here comes. Bam.
There we go. So that's a great point that you just made about the sweetener. I personally have always not been a sugar person. I just don't like sweets. And that is from when I was a child. Like, I just don't like sugar. I never liked candy or anything like that. So when I'm making my drink at home, I'm making it the way that I damn well like to drink it, right? So I'm not putting maybe as much sugar in something as I would get in a bar or establishment. And then maybe it's not even quite as, like, quote unquote technically balanced that way, but that's the way I like to drink it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Balance for you.
yeah, it's balanced for me. So play around at home and make a drink the way that you want to make it. So cheers to everyone. I hope you enjoy your Tommy's margarita. Yeah. So good.
You know,
so good.
when I first encountered the margarita, I'm not going to say what year it was. I didn't understand this whole idea of, like,
It was created.
shortly after it was created. This salt on a drink. Why do I want that? But I think the issue was operator error. Because, like you, I'd go and there'd be like this ginormous mound of salt that had been sitting next to that sponge of Rose's lime juice. Exactly.
Never cleaned out. It
The
was
thing-
just like added to.
Exactly. Never cleaned out. It had the sombrero on top. You opened it up.
We even used Rose's lime juice.
Yeah.
As a sweetener for the. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So a lot of, like, old crusty salt on top of it. And then, of course, they would make it with sour mix. And you're like, everything about this is terrible. But
Yeah.
as opposed to what we're drinking now, where one of our flavor notes that we were talking about was that salinity. It's just a touch of salt really makes this drink sing.
Yeah, there's a saying that without salt, there is no savor, because salt really just really pluses up what you are tasting, right? It adds more depth of flavor with anything that you're tasting, and it adds balance, right? The key to a good cocktail is A, fresh ingredients, but B, balance, right? You can have the best ingredients in the world, the best tequila, but if you make an old fashioned or a margarita with 2 ounces of sugar and 1.5 ounces of tequila, it's going to taste like garbage. And it could be a $200 bottle of tequila and it's still going to taste like garbage because the drink is unbalanced. So really important when you're making drinks to make a balanced cocktail. And one of those things that really does balance a cocktail out is salt. And it's also bitter, right? Like, we use Angostura bitters in a lot of cocktails. And I think a lot of people, like my sisters, love to have cocktails, but they don't quite get, like, why I would put bitter in something, because they don't like bitter flavors. But I have to explain that, like, there's this whole spectrum of what tastes good, right? And just the tiniest bit of bitter added to something that may just have these, like, acidity or sweet or whatever notes to it keeps pushing that envelope as far as the flavor is concerned. And it really helps, complete the puzzle piece of, like, a really beautifully balanced and interesting cocktail.
Well said. Well said. We like to say that everything we think of as sweet is actually not. So whether it's caramel, the interesting part is that you've burnt the sugar and now made it have bitter elements. Coffee, chocolate is incredibly bitter. Key lime pie is really acidic. So there's got to be something to balance that sweetness. Otherwise, we'd all just sit around eating bowls of granulated sugar.
Yeah,
if sugar was
exactly.
interesting,
Yeah. And if you're at home and you make a drink and you're like, oh, this is too sweet, I'd say try adding a little acid to it. Or if you're drinking a drink at home and you say, oh, this is so acidic, add a little bit of sugar to it. Or if you feel like your drink is just kind of flat and boring, add a touch of salt or add a couple drops of bitters to it. Because all of those things counteract each other and they help build upon the flavor of something to create a really beautiful, balanced drink. And I see a lot of cocktails out there that are supposed to be shaken, but maybe don't have a lot of citrus in them, especially something that might be made with, say, like orange juice or grapefruit juice. Like, even if you're at home and you're making like a screwdriver, vodka cranberry, right? Try adding like a 1/2 ounce of lime juice to that. It makes the cocktail explode. It is, like, so much better. And the cocktail originally is good, right? There's nothing wrong with it. But you put a touch more acidity to it because orange and grapefruit don't really have near as much acidity as lemon and lime. And the whole thing just sort of like pops. So, yeah.
Well, we had kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but we talked about agave takes about 7 to 9 years to produce, and how popular tequila has been. I think at this point, every celebrity has a tequila brand or mezcal brand or some sort of connection to that. What is, you guys really lead the way on sustainability and the education of sustainability as far as agave goes. What do you see the future as, and what are we doing to counteract that?
Oh, it's such a tough question, right? Because we love tequila so much in our business, and there's so many factors at play, right? So there is an agave shortage in Mexico, and it's hard to sort of know exactly what that shortage is because of the fact that it is Mexico, it's a different country. It's hard to sort of monitor all of that, but agave is, you know, kind of scarce. And the fact that it is a crop that takes so long to mature, it's really challenging, again, to keep up with supply and demand, which is why a lot of newer companies are utilizing some other more efficient and I would say techniques that kind of don't extract the quality of flavor from the agave as other practices, like using a diffuser or using an autoclave to cook your tequila or your agave, because of the fact that you don't need to necessarily use as mature of agaves to extract the sugars from that, right? As opposed to cooking it, which you need to that full like mature agave. So
Steph,
it's really,
would you please just back up a quick second and explain what an autoclave is?
Yeah, so an autoclave is kind of like a pressure cooker, right? It is, if you can imagine, a bunch of agaves going into an oven, but it is sealed on both ends, and the agave is cooked at a very high heat under very high pressure, similar to a pressure cooker. So it's a lot quicker.
It's an Instapot.
Yeah, it's an Instapot. And in no way do I want to talk down about any other practice of making tequila, right? Because everyone has their reasoning and their flavor profiles and why they choose to make it the way that they do. But there's certain things that are generally, like if I'm cooking at home, there's a big difference between cooking a roast or a sweet potato or something that really benefits from a long cooking process to convert all those sugars or to really, you know, cook that meat. There's a difference between putting something in an Instapot versus a microwave versus an oven, right? And it's going to taste very different depending on how you do it. Is it still probably going to be edible? Absolutely. Do some people prefer it? Maybe in a microwave, sure. But it's going to be very, very different. And it really just depends on, you know, what you think is the better tasting process, I guess you could say. And how you like to drink your spirit, you know, and we believe that cooking in these ovens, taking a longer amount of time and doing it in a more traditional way really has, it creates more depth of flavor. It creates a better product, but that's just our opinion. That's our flavor profile, right? But there are many other ways to create tequila.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that we learned about when I got to actually go down to the Hacienda was that you guys work with, I believe it's 15 farmers for agave, and you actually pay over market price. Does that give you a little bit of sense of relief that no matter what, at least you have those 15 farmers that are going to continue producing for you?
So yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't answer your previous question about sustainability because we got caught up talking about autoclaves and such, but I will address that right after this question. It is 12 agave farmers, but you're very close. And yes, we have had partnerships with some of them since the inception of Patrón. The newest partnership, I believe, is like 12 years old at this point. And our agave farmers are really treated like part of the business, right? We share our business projections with them. And we make business deals with them to ensure, the fact that we have enough agave being planted, but also to make sure that we are giving fair wages to all of the workers that are harvesting the agave. The sad truth in Mexico, when it comes down to something like agave harvesting and these jimadores and the people that own the agave fields, is that when supply and demand fluctuates, although we've been on a steady incline for tequila for years, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon, but in the beginning, in the 80s and 90s, when it was going up and down and up and down. And with a crop that takes this long to harvest, you know, if prices drop for the agaves, there would be fields and fields and fields of agave that sometimes people would just let rot or flower and, you know, mature and not use for tequila because it wasn't worth the amount of money that it would take to pay people to actually harvest it. The cost of the agave wasn't enough, right? So with our partnerships with these families, what we're really trying to do is ensure the safety of their, you know, the people that are working in the fields that own these agave fields. In addition to that, to keep the price for our agaves level for them and then also for us, and be able to have enough agave to produce the amount of tequila that we are distributing, and therefore not needing to change our prices and kind of spike or lower things depending on the agave price as well. It kind of helps keep everything in the same line. Back to sustainability though, if you have a second, I can talk about that
Please.
as well. So the conversation of the future of agave is a tough one, right? Right now, there is a huge demand for agave spirits. There's a ton of celebrity tequilas out there. I actually have tasted a lot of them recently. Some of them are really good. Some of them are not as good. So I would encourage anyone that's on here, like, just because you like a celebrity, I would definitely like do a little bit of investigating as where their tequila is made and the process that they are using to create their tequila. Are you buying into just the marketing of it? Are you buying into the name, or do you really like the product? You know, that's all I would say about that. But tequila is in such high demand right now, and there is no slowing down, right? So the conversation of the agave shortage and the supply of agave in Mexico is a tough one. And agave prices are steadily increasing. And that means that eventually that cost is going to have to be either transferred to the consumer, or tequila is going to become a little bit more sparse because we can't afford to keep creating it in the, you know, level that we're making it right now. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, but I definitely think that, you know, if we're having the conversation of like bourbon and whiskey, I remember 20 years ago when I was getting into the industry that like Blanton's and Pappy and things like that were like available. Weller, you just bought it, right?
Yep.
And Japanese whiskey, like I remember when the Japanese whiskey trend came about and everyone started drinking Japanese whiskey, and I could get Yamazaki wherever, I could get a case of it, it doesn't matter. And then with the popularity, all of a sudden, it's so much harder to get, right? So I would just say that be aware that prices might fluctuate soon. Things might be a little bit harder to get. It might not be that you get every tequila that you possibly want under the sun always available to you at the highest quality at all times, just because that's the nature, you know, that's the nature of something that has a finite quantity, and that has, you know, a very specific region and growing, you know, area and production method. So, but our sustainability, it's been part of our program since day one. A couple big pillars of our sustainability ethos of the company is that we do compost all of our agave fibers that we use in distillation. So when you're producing tequila, there are two main waste products basically, and that is water and also agave fibers. So the agave fibers, we actually have a couple of football fields long area to compost that. The cool thing about that as well is that if smaller tequila brands don't have the space to necessarily compost, if you think about it, you know, we are a large company, so we are able to afford a couple of football fields of land that we don't do anything with but let stuff rot on it, right? That's like kind of crazy when you think about it. And there's a lot of smaller companies that really don't have that same liberty that we do to be able to have the space to do that. So we do allow companies to come in, bring us their agave fibers, take away the same weight in already composted fibers. And we do actually send our workers home with a certain amount of composted agave fibers as well. So we try to compost the fibers and recycle them in that way. We also have a reverse osmosis water treatment plant on site, where we do try to treat as much water as possible from the production process. And that's used to water the grounds. It's used for, you know, our gardens and things like that on site at the hacienda. So we're really trying to repurpose as much as possible of the waste products from the tequila production. And in addition, we've had some really intimate partnerships with a lot of nonprofits in Mexico since the beginning. Luke, I don't know if you were on a USBG trip or a CDP trip, but With all of our USBG trips, we actually bring people to our food bank, the Banco de Alimentos, or we also may potentially take you to a boys and girls home, essentially an orphanage that we work with as well. And bartenders are able to actually get their hands dirty and really put together food and distribute it to people in need, or they work cooking meals or doing something for one of our groups. Actually, we painted playground equipment at the boys and girls home because there was some playground equipment that had broken and not been used for years there. It was falling down, it was on the ground, and Patrón paid to fix it all and paint it. And we got to, it was right before Christmas, and we got to see all the kids come out and see their new playground equipment and like play with us, and they get us cards and everything like that. So it was a really emotional experience. But that's been a really essential part of our company, is giving back to the community. We had 1,600 employees. We added 2 new Tohono stations, and we upped it to 1,800. And now we do have a new facility that's kind of adjacent to the hacienda, called Rosa de Castilla, I believe. And with that, we've added 200 more employees. So now we have around 2,000 employees at our facilities in Mexico. And that is over 4, almost 5 times as many employees as any other tequila company in Mexico, even though we do not by far produce the most tequila in Mexico. So really, again, trying to give back to the community and make sure that we are, you know, putting money in the hands of the people that have contributed to us and our product, and give back to the community that we're a part of.
Yeah, when I was there the last day, we ended up, I was in a kitchen. I remember cutting corn and helping produce whatever's going to be dinner that night, but it was all very influential.
Yeah, it's a really important experience. I love our hacienda experience for people, and you get to see the beautiful grounds and the beautiful distillery, and like Patrón is just really magnificent, right? But for me personally, being that I feel so connected to Mexico in a way from living there, and I lived in a really small area. I didn't live in like Cabo. I lived in a town called Pescadero, and it's very, very, very small. And you know, I think we are extraordinarily privileged in the United States, right? And the fact that like people get to go down there, bartenders get to go down there and really help give back to the community of Mexico, I think is a really essential part of the trip. It's very essential for them to see, you know, and understand that Mexico is not necessarily, you know, it's still a developing country, and to make sure to give back to that community as part of the experience of being in Mexico, right? Like we are taking away the beauty of Mexico, the food of Mexico, the tequila of Mexico. It's important that we also make sure to return something to the community as part of that exchange.
Right. Yeah, I was blown away by all of it. But to end that way was just like kind of put everything in perspective, but very gracious.
Yeah. So yeah, what's next? Are we gonna make another drink, or?
I think we should make another drink, or maybe we should taste the reposado. But we did have a question in the chat. We'd
Sure.
love you to answer. What's the difference, or in your words, what's the difference between Highland and Lowland tequila?
Sure, that's a great question. So the difference is basically, we call it Highland tequila and tequila from the valley, or tequila valley, right? And a lot of people do use that term Highland and Lowland, but we feel it is a tiny bit of a misnomer because of the fact that even tequila that is being produced in the valley, or quote unquote lowland, is still at a couple thousand feet above sea level. So technically it doesn't really qualify as being a lowland because it still is up so high. But so when tequila was originally gaining popularity, right, I said it's the Vino de Mezcal de Tequila. Tequila is located in what's now referred to as Tequila Valley. So this is the birthplace of tequila. This is where a lot of tequila was being produced in the very beginning, and used to have the most distilleries, you know, of anywhere producing tequila, right? And Tequila Valley is at a couple thousand feet above sea level. Now, where we are produced, and I don't have a map for you, but we are produced in the Highlands. So if you fly into Guadalajara, which is in Jalisco, it's capital of Jalisco, and you go about 45 minutes or an hour to the west, you're going to be in the Tequila Valley. If you go about an hour and a half to the northeast, you're going to be in Los Altos, or the Highlands, agave or tequila producing region. As tequila starts to grow in popularity, this tequila that's being produced in the Highlands or Los Altos starts to really grow in popularity even more than the tequila being produced in the valley. The difference between the two, Tequila Valley is going to be a lot hotter, right? It's a little bit lower, a little closer to sea level. So the agave is going to mature a little more quickly, and you're going to get a little bit more of a earthy, I don't want to use the term masculine, but like a more earthy, musky sort of flavor to your tequila. I love the tequilas from Tequila Valley, but they are definitely very meaty, a lot of umami flavors. But when you go up to the Highlands, and this is also similar to grapes, if anyone drinks wine as well, the higher the altitude of grape, the less sun and the heat that it's going to get. It's going to produce more complex, kind of light floral flavors. But the same as with agave. I compare it to wine a lot because I love wine, and I started in the wine kind of world before really going into agave. But I think it's very similar. So the agaves in the Highlands, a little bit cooler, definitely cooler nights, but the temperature variation and the fact that like it's bright and sunny during the day, but nice and cool at night, more around the 6,000 to 8,000 feet, it's going to take a little bit longer for that agave to mature. And I think the flavors from that Highland tequila are a little more complex, albeit a little bit more light, a little more floral, a little more citrusy, a little more nuanced. So just kind of overall a little bit more light and playful, whereas stuff from the Valley is going to be a little bit more of a mouthful. It's going to be a little bit more dense sort of flavor, just a little bit more meaty, I guess you could say.
See, my experience, and maybe I'm wrong, is that the Lowland stuff tends to have more pepper, and the Highland stuff tends to be kind of floral and more
floral,
green.
citrusy. Yeah, you could say pepper. You could say like a little more of the woodsy flavor, a little more salinity to it, right? A little bit more just of those earthy notes. Then yes, the Highland stuff, which I think definitely floral, definitely citrusy for sure.
Cool. I think we should definitely either taste some reposado or make a cocktail. What do you think?
Well, I think that for the sake of time, we can do a little taste of the reposado, and I can talk about the reposado and the añejo at the same time, perhaps, because there's a lot of similarities between the two. And then we can pop right over to make a cocktail after that, right?
Oh, I love this use of time.
So the reposado here, as I mentioned previously, the reposado and the añejo of the Roca line are both going to be aged in used American whiskey barrels. So I encourage anyone that is a whiskey drinker. I drink tequila neat like this, or I drink it on the rocks a lot of times. Sometimes after a long day of work, I don't want to mix myself a cocktail. It's kind of my job. And I know bartenders probably feel the same way. It's like you do it for work. It's kind of like, it feels like a chore sometimes, you know? So I just drink it neat. And this Roca line, this reposado and this añejo, really to me is a wonderful expression to drink neat or to drink it on the rocks, similar to how you would enjoy a whiskey or a scotch, right? And another thing to note too is that ice is great with spirits. However, when you add ice to something, not only are you cooling it and diluting it down a little bit, but sometimes you also dampen a little bit of those esters that are coming off of the tequila. And sometimes you dampen what you're able to pick up with your nose or your taste buds as well. And sometimes that's completely fine, and that's what you're going for. Maybe you don't want that full flavor impact, but it's something to keep in mind when you're drinking a tequila or drinking a whiskey or scotch or something like that. Neat versus over the rocks, right? And for this, I absolutely love it both ways, but I love, love, love drinking it neat. Just the flavors just really sing. So again, this is in American used whiskey barrels. And this is aged kind of to the minimum. So a reposado tequila needs to be aged from 2 to 12 months to be considered a reposado. And añejo is going to be 1 to 3 years to be considered an añejo, rested or aged. And we age to kind of the minimum of those requirements, usually about 3 to 5 months. And we age to the minimum of those requirements because we really don't want to drown our tequila in oak flavor, right? The Roca line is a little bit of a darker in color line because of the fact that whiskey has already been in those barrels. It's a pretty dark char, so you're going to get a little bit darker color. But if you look at something like our reposado, I don't know if you can see it there, but the reposado is a really light straw color, and it barely looks like it has kind of any color to it at all. And that's because we really don't like to over oak our tequilas. We don't feel that we put all this time into how we cooked it, into how we distilled it and macerated the agave and all that sort of stuff. Why drown it in oak flavor when you have a beautiful expression of agave, right? The oak is just supposed to lightly kiss and complement. It's not supposed to take over the entire flavor profile of that tequila, right? So only aged for a few months, kind of to the bare minimum of Reposado aging requirements. And I would love to know what y'all get for this. What do you get on the nose and what do you get on the palate?
One thing you mentioned there, and for tequila in general, when I first started taking tequila seriously, somebody told me, he's like, if you really want to taste what a house tequila tastes like, regardless of the mark, regardless of the brand, you got to taste their Blanc. You got to taste the Blanco. You got to taste the juice, because everything else is the effect of oak on those.
No, absolutely. I would highly suggest. And if the company is not using their Blanco as a base for the rest, and they're using two different distillates, that's also kind of a red flag as well, because that means that they might be producing a lower quality spirit to go in a barrel, because they want the barrel to sort of drown out or round out some of those rough edges from, you know, from the distillate that they put in there. But I absolutely would suggest tasting the Blanco first of anything, before you make a judgment on any of their aged products. And it's also really great to sort of acknowledge then how the flavor has sort of matured along the way. And it's a really great way to kind of do a vertical tasting there. So this Reposado, I think, is gorgeous. It has notes to me of marzipan, a little bit of honeysuckle I always get on this one. It's just a really beautiful Reposado expression.
Yeah, there's
I
the white flower is really interesting, and it's different in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. White flower, I would say I'm getting a little bit of the coconut from the American oak in here as well. I don't get a lot of herbaceousness anymore, but I do get some of that coconut and baking spice, a little bit of caramel, a little bit of cinnamon, things like that.
When you're saying these barrel, and it seems like we were talking about earlier with the liquor companies and the big umbrella. So it seems like a lot of these companies, they own a whiskey, or an American whiskey specifically, company, and then they own a tequila brand. And so they have a place to take all their old barrels.
Yeah, that's the great relationship with American whiskey and tequila, or another spirit that needs to go in a barrel, because the rules with bourbon is obviously you need to use new white American oak. You can't reuse it for something else. So there's a ton of barrels out there that have been used that it's kind of like, what a great way to repurpose them, right?
So an industry insider question, is Bacardi helping you source these barrels now?
Now we do have some fun stuff going on. I can't really say exactly what, but I will say that we do have Angel's Envy in our portfolio now. So I wouldn't be surprised if you perchance in the future see some sort of experimental Patrón aged in some Angel's Envy casks potentially in the future. Or maybe potentially in some Dewars. Illegal actually just released a product, their mezcal, that was actually aged in Dewars. So that's kind of a fun variation or experiment. So yeah, you get an opportunity when you're within this umbrella to then throw stuff in different barrels that other spirits have been in, and sort of see how that flavor profile, you know, reacts with each other, and see if there's a new fun expression that you can come up with that complements each other.
Yeah, totally.
Do you ever, if you're trying, you know, new aging processes and whatnot, is the idea of using any of these new, like the sonic aging and stuff like that, is that ever brought up where it's like, maybe, you know, maybe we try this out?
I will say at Patrón, we do a lot of experimentation, but not a lot of that experimentation will ever get put in the bottle, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The core of Patrón that we always try to educate with, that we lead with, is that we are preserving traditional methods of producing tequila. So there are some processes that you may not, like, we may experiment with, but I don't necessarily see Patrón potentially using in the future, like sonic aging, Cristalino, stuff like that. Sorry, I need to get some water real quick. Been talking a lot. So yeah, we do a lot of experimentation, but I don't necessarily see a lot of that making it to market, so to speak.
One thing, this particular Reposado, one idea I had is, as people who also enjoy whiskey a good deal, the ABV really opens this up a lot. Like it really, I can see why just a few extra points really makes this a lot more chewy, a lot more interesting.
Absolutely. And then it also gives you the liberty of maybe put a couple drops of warm water or something in here to dilute it just a tiny bit to help it open up even more. But then you're not proofing it down too much, you know, because it still is going to have that strong backbone of that higher proof.
Yeah, I was, when you were talking about an ice cube earlier, I was wondering if we were going to broach the subject of like, you know, maybe just a few drops of water. We don't have to we don't have to go all the way to ice cube.
Yeah, no shame in that. I think actually water is a great addition when you're tasting a spirit neat. Oh, I think my earbuds die. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yep.
Oh, okay, there's the one. Okay. So yeah, I think it's great to technology, right? I think it's great to add a little bit of warm water. I think that's a really cool addition to something that you're tasting neat because it does really help open it up quite a bit. And maybe proofs it down just a tiny bit so that if you are sipping on it, it's not this overwhelming 45%, you know, spirit that you're continually imbibing.
Yeah, this is, yeah, I like how you can tell the benefit of that extra ABV in this expression.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Do we want to make the second cocktail and we can open up the questions to the guests and then we can get into some gifts?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Giveaways.
I think that'd be great. So we're going to make an El Diablo. If you want to post the recipe in the chat as well, I saw that kind of pop in there earlier. So an El Diablo is kind of attributed to Trader Vic's recipe book. In the 40s, 50s is when this drink sort of started to grow in popularity. And I made a little bit of a variation on this using the Alley 26 blackberry syrup, which I was really excited for y'all to send over. Yeah. So traditionally an El Diablo is made with creme de cassis or black currant. But I think that blackberry and blackcurrant are similar enough that we can sort of sub it in and sort of make a little bit of a variation on an El Diablo. So this is not a perfect rendition of El Diablo, but this is our rendition. It's going to be just as good. So
rambling toward El Diablo.
Yes, exactly. So to make the El Diablo, we are going to add half an ounce of this blackberry syrup. The recipe I think that is going to go in there is a quarter, but I upped this a little bit because of the sweetness. But you can, again, play around with what you like and whether or not you like it to be sweeter or not. Also, since we're using ginger beer, which is a pre-packaged thing, you never know how sweet it's going to be unless you make it at home. I did have some fresh ginger syrup and then I was like, I'm not going to go crazy. I'm just going to use some ginger beer for this. And then we're going to use some fresh lime juice again here. I just juiced this right before this session, 1 ounce of fresh lime juice. Then we're going to use the Patrón Silver. We're going to use Roca for this. And we're going to use 1.5 ounces, I believe, of this. I love using the Roca Silver in cocktails. It's just so dang good. But I'm someone that always loves to taste the tequila in my tequila cocktails. So I'm just like so stoked always to have something that really like pops. So we're going to add our ice. We're going to shake it up here. You're going to go ahead and get a Collins glass ready. And the bartender in me never ices my glass until the liquid is poured in there, because if you're working a couple drinks at the same time, you don't want to pour the liquid over top of ice because it might melt. But feel free if you're at home to put some ice in your glass. And we're going to shake it. All right. So
appreciate the pro tip.
You know, it's those little things. And like when you're making a drink for yourself at home, no, it's probably not going to make a huge difference, but you know, why not? So we have our liquid in here and we're going to add some ice in there almost to the top. And another pro tip is don't ever skimp on the ice. The more ice you put in there, the better. You would think it would make it dilute more, but it actually doesn't. It keeps the drink colder, and therefore there's going to be less dilution. So you're going to have a less watery drink if you fill this up mostly with ice rather than just having a couple of cubes in there. So don't be shy on the ice. I actually realized that when I was prepping for this class, I brought some ice, or I bought some ice and I forgot to actually put it in my cart. And so I had some home cubes. Thankfully, I have enough home cubes for this class. So we're going to add some ginger beer in here. I think a lot of people are familiar with the idea of the mule. So ginger beer has really grown in popularity a lot with the addition of the Moscow Mule. I think this cocktail is far superior to a Moscow Mule, no shade on that, but I think this is a really excellent variation on that. So recommend using ginger beer or fresh ginger syrup. If you want to make fresh ginger syrup at home, it's super easy. Just juice some ginger, add the same weight of that ginger liquid to white refined sugar, mix it together. So excellent. If you're using that, you're going to have to use soda water in this rather than something with sugar already, because it's going to be too sweet. So if you have the time,
we'd be happy to sell them some ginger syrup.
I didn't realize y'all had ginger syrup as well.
Oh yeah,
I got the ginger syrup. So
we have like 30 syrups. we have the cocktail syrups.
Absolutely recommend using ginger syrup versus ginger beer. It is so good. Fresh ginger syrup. I don't really like ginger flavoring, but fresh ginger juice to me is just like, oh, so good.
Well, we'd take your word for it, but that's about what we're gonna do.
So we have our cocktail here of just about an ounce or ounce and a half of ginger beer poured on top. I garnish with a little lime wheel. You can do lime wheel or wedge. And that is your El Diablo.
Cheers.
Cheers.
The devil's in the El Diablo.
That cocktail is so good. I honestly, and this isn't just a plug for your syrup, I do think that syrup is even better than using a creme de cassis liqueur. It tastes so much more fresh.
I appreciate it. We use local blackberries for it, but I also love that you picked this because this was one of the first drinks that I learned while being here for anyone that wanted a refreshing sparkling tequila cocktail, and I don't think it's ever failed.
It's so good, and I think that it's a great drink to make at home, but also if you're making a cocktail for someone that comes in and say wants a margarita or something like that, this is a great little twist on that I think a lot of people really enjoy that maybe they haven't heard of before. If someone that you know is a margarita drinker, or one of your guests or friends or something at a party, and you're thinking about making a margarita, think about an El Diablo instead. Think about the fresh blackberry syrup from you guys, because it is really good in that El Diablo, and then some ginger beer on top. It's like a little bit spicy, a little bit berry, a little bit citrusy, and just really excellent with that Roca Silver.
Yeah,
I love this drink.
Yeah, it's really good.
So a couple of questions from the folks.
Yeah.
Curtis, welcome Curtis, asked why is Reposado the lower proof than the silver Añejo?
I would say that there's probably not a specific answer to that. The answer would be it tasted better to Francisco.
Okay.
I'm like cleaning up here like I'm working at an actual bar. Steph, put it away. Okay. So yeah, it's just habit.
Old habits.
Yeah,
I die hard.
I would say in general, a Reposado is considered to be the most relaxed, multi-purpose sort of expression if you're looking at a trifold sort of portfolio between a Silver Blanco and Añejo. So Reposado is really made to go in cocktails, but also sort of to be sip neat. It sort of goes, across the board as far as utilization. So I think maybe potentially it was a little softer at 42%, and Francisco thought that would be more versatile perhaps for drinkers, but I don't really have an exact answer for you. I know that we proof them up because of the way that they taste and how they balance the Tohono, but I can't tell you that there's any particular reason why the Reposado is less than maybe the other two. Okay. So I don't have more specifics for that.
Cheryl wants to know, if they visit the hacienda, can they try these alternative ideas, these experimental styles?
So a couple things with the hacienda, and it's not going to be the best news, and I'm sorry in advance, but the hacienda is only open to it's invite only basically, and it's really only open to trade or media professionals that are in some way working with Patrón, so they need access to the hacienda. We try to keep it invite only just to kind of preserve the experience, and not that there's anything wrong with a consumer experience, but we do limit the groups coming to the hacienda, unfortunately. But I would say, gosh, I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I would say
No.
I wish we could bring everyone. I wish we could really bring everyone down to the hacienda. I really do. But we are a global company now with Bacardi, so we have people coming in from bars and restaurants and hospitality industries around the world now. So it's really actually kind of challenging to get as many people in to see everything as we really want to. And since the pandemic, we've actually been closed to tours completely since March of 2020, and we still haven't really opened back up yet. So for the safety of our workers. So it's not the easiest place to get into, unfortunately. I would say maybe get like a part-time job at a bar for 2 days a week, and then you can get in. That's the best way to do
So
it.
there is a program. That's how Luke got in. Could you explain that to the folks?
Yeah, so we have a couple programs for trade in the United States to come down to the hacienda. One of them is through the USBG, or the United States Bartender Guild. If you are a trade professional watching and you are not a member, you can definitely go on the USBG website. You can join the USBG if it's available in your region, and we actually offer the trip to anyone that applies. It may not be immediately. Again, we've been paused for the last year and a half now, so there is quite a buildup of people that were sort of in line to come down. But pretty much anyone that really wants to come down, that applies to come down, should be able to come. I can't guarantee the time frame, but we definitely run a lot of trips through the USBG. In addition to that, there's a Cdp Cocktail Program, which is our cocktail development program, and that is organized directly through our sales team. We have some wonderful sales team members across the United States, and that's their opportunity to really select people that they would like to bring down to the hacienda because of their either contributions to the Patrón, or their love of the brand or support of the brand, or that they feel that they would just really benefit from the experience. So those are the two ways that we get trade down to the facility. Or if you happen to work for, say, a blog or an Instagram account or something that would make sense to come down, then there's also that avenue as well, although not as applicable, obviously, to get everyone from that down.
Yeah, well, when you have the opportunity, write your essays, apply.
Yeah.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Exactly.
Outstanding. So I know we've had you on the call about 35 minutes longer than we asked. We promised you.
No. However long it takes for us to enjoy a couple of cocktails and everything, I'm more than happy to answer questions, and obviously with everyone, but just excited to be here and get to talk to everyone in North Carolina too. I know that there's some people maybe here that aren't from North Carolina, but it's fun for me since I'm sort of a new resident as well.
So speaking of North Carolina, our fine governor, maybe we should start drinking añejo when we talk about our governor, has recently lifted, the mask mandate. When do you think you're going to be out in the market again?
I would say it's a case-by-case basis. Right now, we're not really actively launching any programs, though we are working to do that. We've been working behind the scenes to obviously prepare a lot of things for when markets open back up. But we really like to err on the side of caution, and we also like to make sure that all of our employees are able to start entering into the workforce again at their own comfort level. Whereas some people, may feel totally comfortable just going out to bars all night now without a mask on, and that's fine. And that's, that's legal. But some people may not. So we're building the plane as we fly it, so to speak, in what we are doing actively when we're going back in the market, what activations we're doing. But I will say that we do have a plan by fall of this year to really sort of be back in front of people doing live trainings and things like that. Giving everyone obviously plenty of time to either get vaccinated or not, if whatever your preference is, but just to make sure that everyone feels comfortable before entering a live space with everybody again.
Makes sense.
I guess where I was not so subtly heading is we love this series, and Luke was really spearheading a whole line of educational kind of series with different folks like yourself before the pandemic. And so we're probably going to make this series kind of a hybrid of like still airing it, but have in-person folks. And we'd just love to have you, now that we know that you're in North Carolina, we'd love to have you in person in a few months or whenever that works out.
Yeah, reach out. I'm always happy to help.
And talk Patron.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we should use some giveaways. What do you say? So what do we have for the folks?
We actually have it right around you.
Oh, there it is. Luke, you want to
So I'm
explain
grabbing everything individually.
what they're getting?
So we do have some reusable bags. It'll look like this. Good for groceries, good for almost
then it
anything you need to carry.
Folds into this little tote, kind of.
Yeah, that's part of our, just if I could interject, it's part of our sort of sustainability initiative, obviously with the trade, to make sure that we're offering sort of giveaway items that are, you know, eco-conscious and also make sense for everyone. So the great thing, I use those, they're called Chico sacks. I use them all the time. They literally have a carabiner that clips onto, say, your purse or backpack or something like that. I keep a bunch in the car. It's so convenient too if you're traveling or like on a plane or something, and you want to get like a snack or a meal, but you don't want to necessarily have like another carry-on. You can literally whip out that bag, throw it in there, and then like once you're done eating your snacks or whatever, just pack it back up and attach it to your backpack or something. So really convenient to travel with.
Well, with that and that snack you're talking about, there's also a utensil set made out of bamboo. So there is a fork, a spoon, and a knife and chopsticks that you could keep in your bag.
Oh, also
Carabiner.
the carabiner.
You attach them all in one thing. And we do have some bottle openers. And I think we're going to do what, like 5 questions, and we're going to give away a small bottle of syrup.
Sure. Okay. There we go. Luke, would you like to start with the questions? Or Steph, would you like to start with the questions?
Oh, I think y'all should start. You let me know what you're looking for, and maybe I can come up with something.
Oh, we're just
Okay.
we're just asking questions that you've already answered.
I guess we'll start off a little easy. So most of the tequila it's made, it's for Patron, they're using 2 different styles. What is one style that they're using for the Roca brand?
Style of
I'm sorry.
Like crushing the
mashing
agave.
the agave, yes.
We'll just type the answers right there in the. Has Curtis got it already? Roller. There it is. There's one. And the Stone Mill or Tohono. There we go.
Take that.
Perfect. We'll take that.
Cool.
Okay.
You want to move on to another one, or you?
Yeah, let's keep going. Keep going.
Okay. I got a question for everyone.
Please.
Okay, let's see. If I age my tequila for 14 months, what is it? A Blanco, Reposado, or Añejo?
Love it.
I see a couple Añejos coming in. The answer is Añejo.
Outstanding. Okay. Luke, you got another one?
Oh, you go.
Okay. What should I? Okay, so the Tohono Mill specifically is made of what kind of rock? She mentioned it a few times. Everybody got it. Okay. Okay, excellent. Well,
People are paying attention.
I believe we have a goodly number of these things. So we're basically going to try to give everybody
A little bit.
that got a right answer. We're gonna get you something. So if you want to drop by, just let us know when you're dropping by. Otherwise, please give us your address if we need to mail this to you.
Oh, and if you wouldn't mind putting in the
please.
chat too, if you want, my email is steslar@bacardi.com. If anyone has any additional questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. Also, my Instagram is @agave_mami, MAMI. you're welcome to reach out to me on there as well if you feel more comfortable, if you have any additional questions.
How long have you been Agave Mommy?
So I originally started my Instagram account with Agave All Day, which is when I got Instagram. So I don't know, 12 years ago. When was Instagram out? It's probably something like that. And then just because I love agave. And then once I started working more and more with tequila, I'm one of those people where I like to keep my personal life and my work life separate on social media. Also because I have a lot of I'm kind of a loudmouth, so I want to not get in trouble for anything I say on my personal account if the bosses are watching.
Yeah.
So I have two. And the Agave Mommy I created when I started the job with Patrón, so I could have started working more with tequila, so I could have that as my work account and use that for work stuff versus personal stuff.
I like how both your personal and work are directly tequila related.
Agave, yeah.
Priorities. Yeah. Well, Steph, thank you so much. Your time has been excellent. I really appreciate the history of tequila, the back story about a lot of the processes with Patrón specifically, your time, your personal story. Really appreciate all of it. And is there anything you would like to share before we let you go?
No, I just thank everyone for attending. Thank you for having me. We are a very small team, our education team, but this is our passion, is to educate everyone, trade, consumers, everybody. So there's no question too small or too big. And if there is an answer for it, I will try to find it for you if we are privy to that information. Even if it's down the road and you're like, hey, what about this tequila? And I can say, hey, go here to check out more about it. So please always feel free to reach out to me and use me as a resource. And hopefully I'll see you all in person sometime soon.
Absolutely. We look forward to it.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Steph. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in again. And we'll see you all soon. Next week, or is the week after, we have another episode of our Industry Insider series with more cocktails and conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.